Well, the bye week is gone, and somehow Dillon Gabriel looks better than he did before.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Is Illinois better than we thought? Well, I talked about it last week. They then went into Lincoln and beat Nebraska. That was impressive. So we'll talk about the Illini a bit because that's a game on Oregon's conference schedule, just as we all plan. And the recruiting buzz is abundant. But Dillon Gabriel came to mind over the weekend as Oklahoma benched their five-star redshirt freshman or true sophomore, I don't remember, I think he's a redshirt freshman, Jackson Arnold. When against Tennessee, he went 7-15 for 54 yards, 2 fumbles, and an interception. It was pretty darn ugly. Now, I didn't come on here to dunk on Jackson Arnold or to tell you how great Dillon Gabriel is, because I think Oregon fans now know pretty solidly, and this is just another piece of evidence of how good Dillon Gabriel is and how valuable he is to an offense and how valuable a veteran quarterback is to an offense. It brought to mind the ever ongoing debate. Should Oregon continue bringing in transfer quarterbacks, or do they need to recruit a kid out of high school and develop him? And my take has long been and continues to be whichever option gives you the best chance to win in the short and long run, but particularly in the short term, because Oregon is capable, as we've seen for the last couple of years, of bringing in top 10 portal classes, of bringing in top 10 high school recruiting classes. When you are able to stack talent at that level, you need a quarterback. Go look at what Auburn has got working right now. They have got the best wide receiving core they've had in several years, a preseason all-conference running back, a really good defense, and yet they've got 2 disastrous losses at home this year because they can't figure out the quarterback position and because they haven't made the right moves. So I think for Dillon Gabriel, you saw his value over the weekend when Oklahoma's offense couldn't get going. Now, Tennessee is a good football team. They are one of the 10 best in the entire country right now. I think that's well-deserved. So it's not like he was going up against nobody. This just isn't the first time that Oklahoma's offense has struggled this year. Whereas a year ago, Oklahoma with Dillon Gabriel at the helm went toe-to-toe with and ultimately beat Texas, who was a national semifinal football team. But the debate came into my head about the transfer quarterback, the high school quarterback, and I think Oregon continues to go about this the right way. Because what Oregon should be trying to do, because they have the resources to do so, is give themselves, I think themselves, we'll go with that, the option of either developing a high school kid or bringing in a transfer. Either one. Whichever one allows for the most amount of success. But does Jackson Arnold look ready to go? Because I didn't come on here to dunk on the select few Oklahoma fans who told me how much we weren't going to like Dillon Gabriel this year and how frustrating it was and how ready they were for Jackson Arnold. The narrative that you'd hear around Oklahoma is, no, they let Dillon Gabriel go and had Jackson Arnold come in to start, and they wanted to move on. Like, well, okay, that's a decision that you decided to make. Is Jackson Arnold ready to start? The answer doesn't appear to be yes. So the balance between bringing in a transfer that can help you develop high school talent from the quarterback position and give them the opportunity to play when they're actually ready, when they're actually capable, that's a tough line to walk. And look, some kids just don't have it. You look at what Nico Nico, I think Oregon fans remember at this point. Oregon was after once upon a time, went to Tennessee. He's been good so far. He hasn't been great. He hasn't been perfect. I don't know if Tennessee can win a national championship with him at quarterback this year. He's a little turnover prone for my liking at the moment because he's a young quarterback. But that delicate balance is a tough one to walk. So I'm not all in on, no, you should take a transfer every year. Nor am I all in on, no, you need to recruit high school kids every year. And that's, you should do both. You should always do both. You'll have guys transfer in, transfer out. Guys will be as good as you think, better than you think, not as good as you think. I think Oregon is handling the quarterback room very well over the last couple of years. And look, if they bring in a transfer after this year, it'd be because they think Dante Moore or Austin Novosad, either one is not ready to be the starter in 2025. That's not my suspicion, but it's certainly a possibility. And I think at this point, you've seen with Bo Nix and now Dillon Gabriel, Dan Lanning and the staff, I think deserve benefit of the doubt that whatever quarterback move they're making is going to work out. So I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about UCLA because it's game week once again. No bye week until the end of November. Thanksgiving week, Oregon, I think, is off or sometime around then. Pretty sure November 16th is the Wisconsin game, November 30th, the Washington game, so they're off on the week of the 23rd. But the game time's been announced this week, and look, a lot of Oregon fans, I don't know if they were thrilled. I think Zach Neal was writing over at USA Today that he wasn't thrilled to hear that Oregon's got an 8 p.m. kickoff time, Pacific, against UCLA. Classic battle of Big Ten teams. Oregon's a 24.5-point favorite. That's a big number. Oregon's capable of covering that number. They're also, as we've seen, capable of playing a game that is uncomfortably close. And UCLA, to their credit, I've been pretty down on them over on Locked On College Football, and they backed that up by barely beating Hawaii and then getting blasted by Indiana, who might just be better than some people think. But UCLA played about 3/4 of competitive football with LSU in Death Valley last week. I was impressed. They did a lot of really good things. I'll talk about that more as the week goes on, but I know some of you are saying, wow, 8 o'clock, that's such a late kickoff. Man, why is it so late? Well, here's where I'm coming from. That game is 8 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Mountain Time. Southern Utah plays Austin Peay this week on the road at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. You figure 3 hours or so for the game. Why don't we say 3.5 just to be safe? We'll probably be on the plane about 2 hours after that with a couple hours flight. Hey, by the time I get back to Cedar City, the Oregon game's going to start. So look, some of you may not like the late kickoff. I am not some of you who are in that camp. I love it. Kind of works out perfectly this week. It's always a delicate balance for me with when the SCU game is and when the Oregon game is. Kind of works out perfectly this week. And hey, think about it like this. If you don't like the late kickoff, but you enjoy this show and you like the reaction shows that I do to Oregon games, you're going to have one up immediately. I mean, as soon as humanly possible. So I'm very much here for that. Very, very much here for that. By the way, this question came from Tony to wrap up our first segment on today's show. Hey, Spencer, great job as usual. Keep up the great work. I appreciate you, Tony. Love the nice words. Thank you very much. I think what we've seen up to week 4, if Oregon's going to be in the Big Ten Conference Championship game in the college football playoff, it's something I mentioned on an earlier podcast. Oregon has to dominate both sides of the line of scrimmage in all of their games. The line of scrimmage is going to dictate their season and what it's going to look like, and to live up to their standards. What are your thoughts? It's going to be important in some games more than others. Michigan had a dominant line of scrimmage game on Saturday. It's the only reason they beat USC. Michigan threw for 32 yards and beat USC. 32 passing yards. Beat USC 27-24. Now, it came down to the last play, of course, but I don't think there's... Now, do I want Oregon to be dominant in the lines of scrimmage on both sides of the ball? Yes. Of course, I think the defensive line's been great. The offensive line has been finding its groove over the last couple of weeks, and they were just phenomenal against Oregon State. That always helps. To say that it's going to define every single game, I don't think is necessarily true. I think once you get to the higher games, like a Big Ten championship or a college football playoff game, yeah, no secrets about it. You got to be able to win in the lines of scrimmage, or you're not going to win. Can Oregon get by, though, with average line of scrimmage play and win with guys on the perimeter? You know, an elevated version, kind of what Colorado does, where their lines of scrimmage, they're not great, but they can still win games because they've got a great quarterback and a bunch of great skill position guys. Yeah, every now and then I think Oregon could do that, but would I rather Oregon just dominate in the trenches? Yeah, of course. So appreciate the question, and there are more to get to on this show. Speaking of Illinois, boy, that's an impressive win. How worried should we be about the Illini? That's coming up next. First, let's talk about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, guess what? You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. They've got everything you want. They got a bunch of great information. FanDuel is incredibly confident in Oregon. 24.5-point road favorites against UCLA. Ducks coming off a bye. UCLA, physical game against LSU last week. They played well. I would love to see Oregon cover that number. Nice little 28-point win, like a 42-14. I'd be pretty darn happy with that. If you think that's going to take place, go bet it over at FanDuel. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com, that is the place to check out. College football, NFL, anything you want, head to FanDuel.com. The all-important first, second segment sip of the week. Mailbag questions are always available to all of you. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, at @SMcLaughlinCFB or at Locked On Ducks. Those are the handles. If you want priority access and all sorts of other perks, go become a Locked On Ducks insider. Link in the description below where you can get a free 14-day trial. One of you from over there asked, will Luke Altmyer be the best quarterback that Oregon faces this year? He's certainly going to be up there. And coming into the season, I would have said Luke Altmyer, he's the Illinois quarterback for those who don't know, would have been kind of middle of the road, like closer to the top maybe, but little turnover prone. They've cleaned that up there in Champaign. And they went to Nebraska. I did not think Illinois was winning that football game. Now Nebraska is cursed. And Illinois had every opportunity to lose the game. Nebraska just doesn't win one-possession football games. They've been through the ringer over there in Lincoln. Home games, away games, just the whole 9 yards. So Luke Altmyer was really good. He accounted for 4 touchdowns, did not have a turnover. I was really impressed. I wouldn't say he's the best quarterback Oregon's going to face this year. He could certainly be one of them because I think you have a couple of guys that you look back and say, wow, he really torched the Ducks. Or, wow, this guy was good. Like, think Cam Ward last year, where Oregon beat Washington State, and they ended up doing so comfortably once they found their footing in the second half. But in the first half, Cam Ward was slicing and dicing, and he was making some big-time NFL throws. And I am not surprised in the slightest to see Cam Ward thriving down at Miami. Even with our old pal Mario Cristobal, the Hurricanes are really good, and Cam Ward is a big reason why. In the offseason, I think he was rumored once upon a time to have interest from Ohio State. I'll just tell you right now, I'm really glad that didn't work out. Because if it did, I might feel like Oregon should be favored to lose the Ohio State game. Instead, it's Will Howard, who's good, who is capable, who can make some throws. And I think at the end of the year, you could look back and say, yeah, Altmyer was the toughest quarterback they went against. I think if you catch Washington on the right day, you could say it's Will Rogers. Will Rogers has been around college football for a very long time, got some capable weapons, and they'll have incorporated their offensive system, as much as you can at that point in the year, because it'll be game number 12 for the Ducks and Huskies both during rivalry week. So, yeah, I think Altmyer has been impressive, and I think the Illinois game looks different. Now, they're ranked inside the top 20. I'll tell you, Vegas doesn't buy the Illini yet, and they are certainly better than I expected them to be coming into the year. I had on Sonny Verma of Locked On Illini here on the show in the summer to take a look at different opponents Oregon's playing this year. He wasn't confident in Illinois' ability to push Oregon at all. But Illinois, they look like a physical football team. They are smart with their play action, kind of a Boise State vibe to them, but in the Big Ten in terms of how they play. A little bit more shotgun and RPO to their game, but Altmyer, he's got a good arm, he moves well, and he's protecting the football. And if he does that, he's a talented dude. He's a talented dude. So I'd certainly put him up there. I'd put Will Howard up there because I think this Ohio State offense can be really good with Jeremiah Smith, the true freshman wide receiver. That guy's a stud. That guy is an absolute bona fide stud and is going to push this Oregon secondary, whose praises I've sung on this show, rightfully so, over the first few weeks. Ohio State's going to be a legit test. Emeka Egbuka is good. Jeremiah Smith is really good. The number of impact true freshman wide receivers that exist in college football in big conferences for big-time teams, Ryan Williams in Alabama, Cam Coleman at Auburn, Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State, is pretty impressive. And I just wonder, I see all these true freshman wideouts making an impact. I wonder in my head, what's Decorian Moore going to look like? We've seen Zachariah Branch at USC make an impact as a true freshman. Not on the same level as these other guys, but still, Decorian Moore kind of seems like that guy. He was catching, I think there's 3 touchdowns over the weekend from Keelan Russell, the Alabama quarterback commit. So will Altmyer be the best one? Maybe. I think he's definitely top 2 or 3. I think with the weapons that Will Howard has, he could look like the best one, but Altmyer's good. No, Luke Altmyer is absolutely good. Another question that came from a Locked On Ducks insider. I got an interesting mailbag question. Who's the most successful player that transferred from the Ducks during the Lanning era, and should we have not let him go? Well, Lanning has said a couple times correctly that he's proud of the fact they've never had a starter transfer out. Of course, guys have left the program and gone on to succeed elsewhere. I think the guy I'm looking at right now who's having the most success, there are 2 guys that are really popping this year. Dante Dowdell, running back at Nebraska. Dante Thornton, wide receiver at Tennessee. The great thing about this for Oregon, though, is those guys are studs, which doesn't surprise me. Thornton is the big play threat in Tennessee's offense with Nico at quarterback. They connected for, I think, a 65-yard touchdown against Oklahoma in Norman on Saturday night, and it was a thing of beauty. And it's exactly what we all saw when Dante Thornton first committed to and was playing for the Ducks. Like, he's got home run capability at the wide receiver position. And Dante Dowdell, every bit the recruit that he was when he first came to Oregon, and he just kind of got lost on the depth chart. And I don't think you look at either one of those guys and say, oh man, this Oregon team really needs them. And that's the good thing, because those guys are legitimately good. Those guys are Power 4 football players on good teams. They are starter or heavy rotation guys, and they are making a legitimate impact. And I look at them and go, yep, they would have been exactly as good as I thought they could have been if they had stayed at Oregon. I was higher on Dowdell than Thornton, but certainly I knew that both either were making plays already in Thornton's case or were capable of doing so in Dowdell's case. And Dowdell's been really, really good over at Nebraska. So I'm happy to see him have success, because he would have just been lost in Oregon's backfield here. But I don't look at either one of those guys and think to myself, wow, I wish Oregon could have kept him around, really would have helped. Like, no, love the receiving core, love the running back room. Like, Dowdell would probably be a 2025 guy. So I don't blame him for transferring out, because he found a place where he's, in a split backfield situation with Nebraska, and next year he could be the number 1 guy if he keeps this up. So yeah, that is an interesting question. I love when you guys say, I have an interesting question. Like, I'll be the judge of that. I'm just kidding, of course. But that was an interesting question. Another one, I don't know if it counts necessarily, but Kelvin Banks was a one-time Oregon commit, not a transfer. But then he never played for Dan Lanning. That's just another name I've thought about, because he's kind of the anchor. He's going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft this year. He's the anchor on that Texas offensive line. He was the first recruit, or one of the big names that flipped from Oregon to somewhere else when Mario left for Miami. So that one doesn't count, but that was another name that popped into my head. This question from Bobby Spencer. I had a question about recruiting, which I'm going to talk about more later in the show. I know this is very far away, but it's the bye week, so while we have the downtime, do you see us adding a center in the transfer portal this offseason? Not putting down our guys at all, but we do only have 2 true centers on the roster and no centers in the class of 25. It'd be great to see some more depth at the position. Looking at the roster, seems to be where we have the biggest need. I trust Danny Boy and the coaches, but wanted to know your thoughts. Cheers. Yeah, I could see it. Oregon actually looked at a center from Texas A&M in the portal, didn't end up landing him. I forget the guy's name, but this is probably the reason why in the spring window they considered bringing someone in that had starting center experience, because they knew they're thin at that position. Now, the issue or difficulty, I'd say, recruiting a center position is you don't get reps if you're not a starter. So, like, take Nishad Strother, for instance. Transferred him from East Carolina last year, battled an injury, now he's healthy. Even if Matthew Bedford comes back, we haven't seen the last of Strother playing along the offensive line. But he can rotate in at guard. Or he can go if someone, gets dinged up, or if someone has to miss a game. Like, he steps in and plays. He could play left, He could probably play right if he needed to. But most guys are not trained to be centers. That is a whole different position. So Poncho is clearly going to be Oregon's starting center going forward. We thought that coming into the year. I think that's where they've settled, and they should. Could I see him adding a transfer center in the offseason? Yes, I could. I just don't know what level of backup center you're going to find. I think the more likely option is, Poncho is going to be your center. You bring in a guy who can either cross-train there or has aspirations to one day be a center but isn't right now. Because hard to see a guy transfer in as a backup center unless he can also play guard like Jackson Powers Johnson. But I don't mind looking ahead because, well, it was the bye week. It's not anymore, though. It is game week. Appreciate the question. Keep them rolling in. Recruiting buzz is abundant and more than a little interesting. That is coming up next. Right after we talk about Game Time. Game Time has a new feature. It's called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff, so you only see incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I once went through a buffet with my cousin, and I got some small stuff first before I went for the prime rib. He went straight for the prime rib. Sat down, he had 2 slabs covered in horseradish and au jus. I said, going straight for it? He goes, look at your plate, all fluff. You don't want the fluff. Game Time filters that out. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. They have their lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And their Game Time ticket coverage is the best and most flexible in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's $20 off if you use the code LOCKEDONCollege. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. The recruiting buzz is a buzzin', like we're watching Jerry Seinfeld's B-movie, which is a hilarious film. I will not be taking questions on that matter at this time. So, Steve Wiltfong and somebody else, I think maybe Chad Simmons at On3, they have logged a prediction for Oregon to flip someone from Tennessee, which would feel kind of nice because Tennessee took somebody that Oregon had committed in Deshaun Brame, the tight end. Oregon is without a tight end right now. I would be surprised if we don't continue to hear little murmurs on guys like Michael Terry III, or there's a guy committed to Michigan, there's a guy committed to Washington, that Oregon has just seeing little things, hearing little birdies here and there. Never know. Long way to go. But Douglas U2, 4-star offensive lineman that originally committed to Tennessee. This is just a prediction. Predictions, as we know, whether in Oregon's favor or not in Oregon's favor, they are not 100% accurate. But sometimes they are, and I think this would be a good thing for the Ducks. So the offensive line, I think, has been better stocked than people think in the high school recruiting ranks over the last couple of cycles. But certainly if you look at Oregon's 2025 recruiting class, which is currently ranked 13th nationally according to 24/7 Sports, they've got Zaire Addison, they've got Alai Kalaniuvalu, who won't be on Oregon's roster for a couple of years because he's going to take a mission. He could be a center of the future perhaps. And then they have Dimitri Manning, a 3-star offensive tackle who probably ends up playing inside, and Zaire Addison, listed on 24/7 as an interior guy, probably ends up playing offensive tackle. It's a position group that, on the whole, compared to the last couple of classes, Oregon's a little bit light at, so I could see them adding an offensive lineman. I could see them picking up a couple offensive linemen if, of course, they're able to add the recruitment. I'm just speaking from a class versatility standpoint. I think Oregon absolutely has room to add a couple more. So I would love to see that prediction come true. And I don't think Oregon is going to reach 20 commitments in the class of 2025. I'd be pretty darn shocked if the number stays under 15. The reason it's still ranked so high is because they have some highly rated guys, like Dorian Brew, like Dallas Wilson, DeCorian Moore, Trey McNutt, all guys who, are high 4 or 5-star recruits in the 25 cycle, but they're all on the perimeter. And I think this class, compared to what Oregon's done the last couple of cycles, is light in the trenches. So that's where I'd expect there to be a considerable amount of movement. And then the tight end position that I mentioned as well. I think that's one that Oregon probably ends up adding. Now, they brought in 2 tight ends, not 1, 2 in the 24 class. Roger Saliapaga, who I've seen pop up on special teams every now and then, and AJ Pugliano, the 3-star out of Medford. So, shout out to Medford, Oregon, by the way. But I don't know that tight end is a position where you can easily find guys in the transfer portal. It's not impossible. It's happened before. Kenyon Sadiq is probably your number 1 guy going into next year. Is that enough? Do they think that that's, going to get them the necessary depth that they've got right now? Because right now, Oregon's tight end room is deep, but you're going to lose your top 2 guys. Are Roger and AJ going to be ready to be inline contributors in 2025? I don't know. That's a question for the coaching staff to answer. So I'd watch on the tight end front. I would watch on the trenches front as well on either side. Frankly, they've got Matthew Johnson, the 4-star out of De La Salle, who is a defensive lineman or an edge guy. And then they don't have a defensive lineman. Now, Oregon's recruited that position really, really heavily over the last couple of cycles. The first 2 for Dan Lanning, Tosh Lupo and company. So they probably feel confident that those guys aren't transferring out, even though they're rotational guys at best this year and maybe ready to be full-time starters come 2025. And Oregon will lose a decent number of players, but not everybody from this year's defensive line. And there's always a transfer portal as well. But I'd watch for the offensive line to see if they pick up at least 1, maybe 2 more. Another thing that I saw floating around the interwebs is that Dan Lanning said that he reached out to Dijon Lee, who's a 5-star cornerback commit for Alabama. Now, Oregon's going to have some turnover in the secondary this year. They've recruited the secondary pretty well the last couple of cycles and in this one as well with Dorian Brew and Trey McNutt. But hadn't heard that name pop up before. Alabama commit Kalen DeBoer has been doing a really good job, he and his staff, of recruiting and keeping the talent level where Alabama expects it to be, where they came to expect it to be under Nick Saban. That one caught my eye. I was like, whoa. Now, Lanning's quote was, it's good to have a relationship with a guy because you never know. Maybe he goes to Alabama, doesn't play as much as he wants. Maybe he wants to transfer out. Oregon, of course, took an Alabama defensive back in the transfer portal and Peyton Woodyard, the safety. So it's not like it hasn't happened before. Doesn't hurt to have a relationship. Don't burn bridges, not in the recruiting world in 2024. That's never a good thing to do. Another recruiting note, this one of the buzz, not of the best variety, but I have not heard or seen anything serious to indicate that Oregon fans should be worried about Dallas Wilson, the 5-star wide receiver. He was in Eugene over this past weekend during the bye week. FSU and Miami have been trying to get him. He's from the Tampa area, and he's the number 1 receiver in the state of Florida down there. That one's just going to be drawn out. Florida State, Miami, they're going to keep making a push. I don't know what kind of pitch FSU can make right now, but Miami can sure make a really good one. FSU looks like they're trying to rebuild and restart the whole program down there in Tallahassee a year after winning the ACC and going undefeated, but Miami can make a strong pitch. So I'd be more worried about the Hurricanes than Florida State in that battle, just at a glance, because the passing game has been just so inept for Florida State this year. But there are other factors that go into recruitment, not just the on-field performance. And then lastly, speaking of number 1 wide receivers, DeCorian Moore reportedly reached out to Naeem Offord, 5-star Ohio State defensive back commit. I'm here for it. Sometimes players are the best recruiters on staff. Sometimes they're the most important recruiters on staff, no matter what position they are at. So if Oregon were to add Offord to this class, it would jump back towards the top 5, even though their numbers are considerably lower than the schools that are in that range. Ohio State is number 1 class with 26 commits, Bama 20, LSU 26, Auburn 24, and Georgia 21. Those are the top 5 2025 classes right now. But Oregon's just had such a high average player rating that they're still inside the top 15. And there will be more names added to the 2025 cycle. A matter of when, not if. Oregon had a pretty sizable handful of players commit during the season last year. So recruiting buzz, it's been quiet. I'd expect it to pick up. Thanks for making this your first listen. Go make a Locked On College Football your second. I host over there, giving you the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. That is this college football right here. Best one. There's nothing I would rather cover. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.